The galaxy thought it knew humans. Weak. Fragile. Short-lived creatures who barely survived their own planet's hostile environment. But, when the medical staff of Kepler Station watched a human drag something impossible through their emergency bay doors, bleeding from wounds that should have killed any known species 3 times over, they realized they had been catastrophically wrong. What emerged from that sealed pod would rewrite everything they understood about the species they had so carelessly dismissed. Because sometimes, the most dangerous predator is the one willing to sacrifice everything to protect what it loves. And humans? Humans love harder than any species in the galaxy dares to imagine. The emergency klaxons of Kepler Station screamed their mechanical song across the medical bay as Dr. Vexai finished her 3rd cup of stimulant tea. Another quiet rotation in the outer rim, another endless shift of treating mining accidents and cargo disputes. The Thackeray physician's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a habit that betrayed her boredom to anyone familiar with her species. Contact on approach vector 7, the station's AI announced in its maddeningly calm tone. Single occupant vessel. No response to hails. Vexai's secondary arms manipulated her medical scanner while her primary limbs updated patient files. Standard procedure. Most likely a drunk cargo pilot who'd passed out at the controls. The outer rim attracted that type. The blast doors to the emergency bay began their slow cycle. Through the reinforced viewport, she watched a battered single-person craft limp into the docking bay on failing thrusters. The vessel looked wrong. Scorched metal hung in strips from its hull like dead skin. Whatever had happened out there, it hadn't been gentle. Nurse Krillick, Prep Emergency Station 2, she called to her Zalari assistant. The insectoid being's compound eyes tracked to her immediately, mandibles clicking in acknowledgement. The craft settled onto the deck with a grinding screech of tortured metal. For several minutes, nothing happened. Vexai found herself leaning forward despite her professional composure. The silence stretched too long. Then, the ship's hatch blew outward with explosive force. What emerged defied every medical text she'd studied in her 47 years of practice. The creature stood upright on 2 legs like a Thackeray, but its skin was wrong. Pink-brown flesh stretched over a frame that seemed too small for the strength it displayed. No exoskeleton. No natural armor. Just vulnerable meat wrapped around bones. It was bleeding from dozens of wounds. Dark red fluid seeped from gashes across its torso, stained the torn fabric it wore for protection. By Vexai's calculations, it should have been dead 3 times over. Instead, it dragged something behind it. A sealed emergency pod. The creature's eyes met hers through the viewport. She'd seen those eyes on prey animals in her homeworld's nature preserves. Small, forward-facing, designed for tracking and hunting. But these held something else. Something that made her primary hearts skip their rhythm. Intelligence. Desperate, furious intelligence. The being yanked the pod forward with movements that spoke of reserves no wounded animal should possess. Each step left bloody prints on the deck plating. Whatever was in that pod, the creature valued it more than its own rapidly failing life. By the void, Nurse Krillick whispered, his voice modulator crackling with static. What is that thing? Vexai was already moving. Her medical training overrode the primal fear crawling up her spine. The creature collapsed as the bay finished pressurizing, one hand still gripping the pod's transport handle. She could see its chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. Emergency team to Bay 7, she commanded, sealing her environmental suit. Unknown species, critical condition. The blast doors cycled open. The smell hit her first. Copper and ozone and something else. Something organic that made her tertiary stomach churn. She'd treated dozens of species over the years, but this scent was new. Wrong. The creature lay motionless now, its grip finally loosening on the pod. Up close, she could see the wounds were even worse than they'd appeared. These weren't clean cuts from tools or weapons. Something had tried to tear this being apart with claws and teeth. Scan it, she ordered, running her tricorder over the alien's torso. The readings made no sense. Its internal structure violated basic biological principles. the skeleton was too light, the muscle density too low. By all rights, it shouldn't be able to function, let alone survive the trauma she was seeing. Doctor, Krillik's voice carried a note of awe that she'd never heard from him before. The pod. It's not emergency equipment. She turned to examine the sealed cylinder the creature had risked everything to protect. Standard life support pod, yes, but modified. Reinforced. The viewport was darkened, but she could make out something small inside. Can you crack the seal? She asked. I think so, but, Doctor. Krillik's antennae twitched nervously. The atmosphere mixture inside. It's the same as what this creature breathes. Vexai felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's climate control. She looked back at the unconscious being, then, at the pod. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. It's not cargo, she said quietly. It's a passenger. The pod's emergency release engaged with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. The darkened viewport cleared, revealing what lay inside. A smaller version of the creature. Tiny. Fragile. Its chest moved with the rapid breathing of deep sleep or sedation. The medical bay fell silent except for the background hum of life support systems. 3 Thrakari orderlies, 2 Zalari nurses, and 1 very confused Graxian intern all stared at the same impossible sight. A wounded predator species had dragged its offspring through space, dying by degrees, to get it medical attention. Doctor, the intern stammered, his translator struggling with his emotional state. What do we do? Vexai looked at the small being in the pod, then, at its unconscious protector. Every instinct told her to maintain distance. Unknown species were dangerous by definition. First contact protocols existed for good reasons. But medical ethics were older than protocols. We saved them both, she said, activating her emergency beacon. And, then, we figure out what kind of species travels the void to protect its young. The creature's eyes fluttered open as her teen worked. Those forward-facing hunter's eyes found hers immediately. She expected fear, aggression, the typical response of cornered animals. Instead, she saw gratitude. It tried to speak, its mouth forming sounds that bypassed its translator entirely. The universal language of a parent checking on their child. The small one is safe, she told it, hoping her translator could bridge the gap between their species. Rest now. The creature nodded once and let unconsciousness take it. But its hand had moved to rest against the pod's surface, maintaining contact even in its compromised state. Vexai began running detailed scans on both patients, her mind racing through treatment protocols. She'd dealt with dozens of species, but nothing like this. The adult's physiology made no sense from an evolutionary standpoint. Too fragile for a predator, too aggressive for prey. As if the universe had designed something that could think like a hunter but die like everything else. The small one in the pod stirred, tiny features scrunching in distress. Without conscious thought, the unconscious adult's vitals spiked, some deep instinct responding to its offspring's discomfort even while comatose. Remarkable, Krillik muttered, reviewing the readouts. It's still protecting the young even while unconscious. More than that, Vexai replied, studying the biological data streaming across her screens. Its body is prioritizing the child's well-being over its own survival. Look at these stress hormones. The readings told a story that changed everything she thought she knew about evolution and survival. This species had somehow developed beyond simple self-preservation. They'd evolved to value something more than their own lives. That should have been impossible. In the galaxy's long history, every intelligent species had developed along predictable lines. Survival first, reproduction second, social bonds third. The strong protected themselves, then, their genetic legacy, then, their communities. This species appeared to have thrown that hierarchy into reverse. As she worked to stabilize her patients, Vexai realized that everything the galaxy thought it knew about the universe was about to change. Because if this species could evolve beyond self-preservation, what else were they capable of? The question would haunt her for the rest of her very long life. 3 days passed before the adult creature regained consciousness. Vexai had used every technique in her medical arsenal to keep it stable, but the being's physiology continued to baffle her. Its wounds healed at an impossible rate, yet its baseline vitals remained dangerously weak. As if its entire biological system had been designed by committee. The small one had awakened first, filling the pod with soft sounds that her translator couldn't interpret. Not distress calls, she realized, but something else. Communication attempts. The tiny being was trying to talk to its unconscious protector. Nurse Krillic approached her workstation with obvious reluctance. Station Command wants a full report. They're asking about quarantine protocols. Vexai didn't look up from her biological analysis charts. Tell them the subjects are stable and pose no immediate threat. That's not exactly true, is it? Krillic's compound eyes reflected the harsh medical bay lighting. The scans you've been running. The data doesn't make sense. She finally turned to face him. In 3 decades of working together, she'd learned to read her assistant's moods through the subtle movements of his antennae. Right now, they showed fear. What concerns you specifically? The adult's muscle density readings. The bone structure. The neural complexity. His mandibles clicked nervously. Doctor, this species shouldn't be able to survive their own planet's gravity, let alone travel through space. Vexai pulled up the comparative analysis she'd been avoiding. The data painted a picture that violated every principle of evolutionary development. The adult creature possessed the mental capacity of an apex predator but the physical durability of a herbivore. Its skeleton could barely support its own weight, yet it had somehow crossed interstellar space while critically wounded. There's something else, she said quietly. The small one's biological age versus its developmental markers. Krillic's antennae stopped moving entirely. What do you mean? According to cellular analysis, it's barely past the embryonic stage for this species. But its neural development suggests consciousness, possibly even intelligence. She gestured to the pod where the tiny being continued making soft sounds. It's trying to communicate complex concepts. That should be impossible for something this young. The implications hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. A species that achieved consciousness before physical maturity, that prioritized protection of offspring over self-preservation, that somehow survived despite being biologically unsuited for their own existence. Dr. Vexai. The station's AI interrupted their conversation. The adult subject is showing signs of consciousness. They moved to the medical bed where their patient lay connected to life support systems. The creature's eyes opened slowly, immediately tracking to the pod containing its offspring. Those forward-facing hunter's eyes showed relief at seeing the small one safe. Can you understand me? Vexai asked, her translator working to bridge the linguistic gap. The being nodded slowly, then attempted speech. The sounds it produced were strange, melodic in ways that her species found unsettling. After several attempts, the translator began offering interpretations. Thank you, the mechanical voice finally provided. Child, safe? Your offspring is healthy, she assured it. But you've suffered severe trauma. What attacked you? The creature's expression shifted, and Vexai felt a chill run through her primary nervous system. She'd seen that look before, in the eyes of Kepler Station's security forces when they discussed particularly dangerous criminals. It was the look of something that killed without hesitation. Korthak raiders, the translator provided. Took others. Ship destroyed. Only escaped with. The being's vital signs spiked as it tried to sit up, reaching toward the pod. Vexai gently pressed it back down, noting how little force was required. This species really was as physically fragile as the scans suggested. Rest, she commanded. The child is safe. Tell me about your species. Human, the being said. We are human. The word carried no meaning in any database she could access. A truly unknown species then, not merely uncontacted. You call yourselves human, she repeated. And you traveled how far to reach this station? 16 days. Ship damaged. Life support failing. The human's eyes never left the pod. Had to save Emma. Emma is the child's designation? My daughter. The translators struggled with the concept, offering several interpretations before settling on a term that roughly meant direct genetic offspring, female variant. She's only 6 months old. Vexhai felt her secondary heart skip. 6 months for this species might be equivalent to several years for others, but the biological data suggested otherwise. This child was barely past the embryonic stage, yet the parent had risked everything to protect it. Why bring the child on a space voyage, she asked. Wouldn't it have been safer on your homeworld? The human's expression grew dark. Earth is gone. The simple statement carried weight that made the medical bay's atmosphere feel heavier. Vexhai had heard those words before, from refugee species whose worlds had been consumed by war or natural disaster. But this human spoke with a finality that suggested something worse. Gone how? She pressed. Korthak invasion fleet. Surprise attack. Most colonies evacuated in time, but the human's breathing became labored. Home system overrun. Billions dead. Krillik stepped closer to the bed, his scanner active. Doctor, stress levels are critical. Perhaps we should continue this later. But Vexhai needed to understand. You escaped with your child during a planetary invasion? Evacuation ship took damage. Emma and I made it to an escape pod, but the others. The human closed its eyes. The Korthak don't take prisoners. They consume. The clinical detachment that had served Vexhai throughout her career cracked. She treated Korthak attack survivors before. The raiders were known throughout the galaxy for their brutality, their habit of using captured populations as food sources. Most species that encountered them were either too weak to resist or too strong to interest them. Humans, apparently, fell into neither category. Your escape pod, she said. It wasn't equipped for infant life support. Modified the systems. Jury-rigged everything. The human's voice carried quiet pride. Emma's pod has 37 days of air and nutrition. Mine had 3. The mathematics hit Vexhai like a physical blow. This being had condemned itself to death to ensure its offspring's survival. Not eventually. Not if rescue failed to arrive. Immediately and deliberately. You knew you wouldn't survive the journey, she stated. Knew I might not. Emma had to. The human's eyes opened again, focusing on her with startling intensity. Species survival protocol. Protect the young. Protect the future. Even at the cost of your own life? Especially then. The words carried a conviction that made Vexhai step back involuntarily. This wasn't the desperate gamble of a cornered animal. It was calculated sacrifice. This species had evolved to value abstract concepts like future and survival of others over their own immediate existence. From an evolutionary standpoint, it should have been suicidal. From a galactic perspective, it was unprecedented. Dr. Krillik's voice carried new respect. The child is responding to the adult's voice patterns. In the pod, the tiny human had begun making more complex sounds, its small arms moving in what might have been an attempt at communication. The adult human smiled, a facial expression that Vexhai's species used to signal aggression but somehow looked gentle on this being's features. Hello, sweetheart, the human whispered. Daddy's here. The child's response was immediate. The soft sounds became more organized, almost rhythmic. Vexhai realized she was witnessing something profound. This infant was attempting to comfort its wounded parent. The neural development readings, she said quietly to Krillik. Run them again. The results confirmed her suspicion. The child's brain activity showed patterns consistent with emotional recognition and empathy. At barely 6 months of biological development, this tiny being understood that its parent was hurt and was attempting to provide comfort. What kind of species, Krillik murmured, evolves empathy before physical survival skills? Vexhai didn't answer. She was too busy recalculating everything she thought she knew about intelligence, evolution, and survival. Because if humans could develop emotional bonds this strong this early, if they could sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like species survival, then they represented something entirely new in the galaxy's understanding of life itself. The question that had been haunting her for 3 days crystallized into something approaching certainty. This species didn't just think differently than others. They felt differently. They loved differently. And that difference might make them the most dangerous beings the galaxy had ever encountered. Not because of their strength or weapons or technology, but because of what they were willing to die for. Station Commander Thralak arrived with a full security detail 6 hours after Vexhai filed her initial report. The Corvin's imposing frame filled the medical bay doorway, his forearms displaying the ceremonial weapons that marked his rank. Behind him, armed guards positioned themselves with military precision. Dr. Thralak's voice carried the authority of 40 years commanding Outer Rim installations. I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Vexhai glanced at her human patients. The adult had been sleeping fitfully, occasionally murmuring in its native language to the child. Every time the small one made distressed sounds, the parent's vitals responded immediately, even while unconscious. A refugee species, she replied carefully. Survivors of a Korthak assault. That's not what your biological reports suggest. Thralak moved closer to the medical bed, his primary eyes studying the human with obvious suspicion. Your scans indicate physiological impossibilities. Sir, Nurse Krillik interjected nervously, perhaps we should discuss this outside the ward. No. The commander's tone brooked no argument. I want to see these creatures for myself. The human's eyes opened at the sound of raised voices. Those forward-facing hunters' eyes immediately assessed the situation, tracking each armed guard's position before settling on Thralak. The being attempted to sit up, moving slowly but deliberately. Stay down, Vexhai urged, but the human ignored her. Commander, the translator provided after the human spoke. Thank you for sanctuary. Thralak's secondary arms shifted, a gesture that indicated wariness among his species. Your medical data raises concerning questions about your capabilities. I don't understand. Your skeletal structure couldn't support the physical demands of interstellar travel. Your muscle density is insufficient for the combat scenarios you claim to have survived. Yet here you are. The commander's primary eyes narrowed. My science officers believe you're either lying about your origins or hiding your true nature. The human was fully upright now, despite Vexhai's protests. Its movements were careful but determined, like a predator conserving energy for the right moment. I'm dying, the human said simply. Whatever threat you think I represent, my biology is handling it. That's exactly the problem. Thralak gestured to one of his guards, who activated a portable scanner. Your cellular decay rate should have killed you days ago. Instead, you're showing signs of regeneration. Impossible regeneration. Vexhai felt ice crystallize in her primary heart. She'd been so focused on treating her patients that she'd missed the broader implications. The human's wounds were healing, yes, but at a rate that defied medical explanation. Not just faster than expected, but faster than should be biologically possible for any known species. The child shows similar anomalies, the guard reported. Accelerated neural development. Enhanced immune responses. Biological markers that suggest adaptation to multiple environmental stresses. Adaptation, Thralak repeated thoughtfully. Or engineering. The accusation hung in the recycled air like a poison cloud. Vexhai saw the human's expression change, those gentle features hardening into something that made her step back involuntarily. You think we're artificial, the human said. Not a question. I think you're too perfect to be natural. Thralak's ceremonial weapons gleamed under the medical bay lighting. A species that survives impossible trauma, heals at accelerated rates, and demonstrates emotional complexity beyond any known evolutionary model? That suggests intelligent design. By whom? That's what we intend to discover. The human looked at its sleeping child, then, back at the commander. Vexhai watched something shift in those alien features. The grateful patient disappeared, replaced by something far more dangerous. Emma stays here, the human said quietly. Whatever you think I am, she's innocent. If you're artificial constructs, the child represents the same potential threat. She's 6 months old. Age is irrelevant if you're manufactured weapons. The monitoring equipment began registering changes in the human's biological state. Heart rate increasing. Adrenaline levels spiking. Muscle tension building despite the being's obvious physical limitations. Sir, Vexhai interrupted, her medical training overriding political considerations. The patient's stress levels are approaching critical thresholds. Stand aside, doctor. I will not allow you to harm my patients. Thralak turned his full attention to her, all 4 eyes focusing with predatory intensity. Your patients may be enemy agents. Infiltration units designed to appear harmless while gathering intelligence. They're refugees, she insisted. Survivors of genocide. Allegedly. The commander signaled to his guards. We'll transfer them to containment while we investigate their true nature. No. The single word came from the human, but it carried weight that made everyone in the room freeze. Vexhai had heard that tone before, from cornered predators who had abandoned hope of escape and chosen to make their final stand. You will not touch my daughter. Thralak drew one of his ceremonial blades. You're in no position to make demands. The human stood. Vexhai's scans had been accurate. This being was physically fragile, its skeleton barely adequate to support its own weight. But, as it rose from the medical bed, every person in that room took an involuntary step backward. Because fragile or not, this creature radiated lethal intent with an intensity that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to evolutionary survival instincts. I crossed 16 days of void to protect her, the human said, its voice carrying quiet conviction. I survived Korthak raiders, system failures, and slow suffocation. You think a few guards with energy weapons are going to stop me? You can barely stand, Thralak observed, but his grip on his weapon had tightened. I don't need to stand for long. The child in the pod began making distressed sounds. Not random infant crying, but organized communication. Vexhai realized with growing horror that the tiny being was responding to the emotional state of its parent. The child is reading the adult's stress levels, she reported. Commander, this situation is escalating beyond the human moved. Vexhai had treated dozens of species over her career. She'd seen apex predators, evolved warriors, and genetically enhanced supersoldiers. None of them had prepared her for what she witnessed in that moment. The human shouldn't have been capable of combat. Its physiology was wrong, its energy reserves depleted, its wounds still healing. By every medical metric, it was on the edge of complete system failure. But it moved with a precision and speed that spoke of evolutionary programming older than civilization. Not the calculated strikes of a trained warrior, but the desperate fury of a parent protecting its young. The first guard went down before his weapon cleared its holster. The second managed to activate his energy projector but missed as the human flowed around his attack like water. The third guard's shot hit the medical equipment instead of its target. Thralak roared a battle cry and charged, his ceremonial blade extended. The human met him with bare hands and impossible determination. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and fury. The commander's superior size and strength should have ended the fight immediately. Instead, the human fought with a viciousness that transcended physical capability. Because this wasn't about winning. It was about buying time. Krillik! Vexhai shouted. Emergency lockdown. Seal the medical bay. Her assistant's mandibles clicked rapidly as he triggered the containment protocols. Blast doors began sealing, locking down the medical bay's access points. Whatever happened next would remain contained. The fight ended as suddenly as it had begun. Thralak's blade found its mark, sliding between the human's ribs with surgical precision. But, instead of collapsing, the wounded being grabbed the commander's weapon arm and held on. "My daughter," it whispered, blood speckling its lips. "Promise me." Thralek stared down at his opponent with something approaching respect. "You're dying." "I was already dying." "Promise me Emma will be safe." "Why should I?" The human's grip tightened despite its failing strength. "Because you have children too. I can smell it on you. The scent of young ones." Thralek's secondary arms went still. In his species, that was a sign of deep emotional consideration. "You would have killed us all to protect one infant," he said. "Yes. That's not rational." "No. It's not." The human's eyes were closing, but its voice remained steady. "It's love." Vexhai watched something fundamental shift in the commander's expression. She'd served under him for 8 years and had never seen him show uncertainty. But, faced with this dying creature's absolute devotion, his certainty cracked. "Doctor," he said quietly, "could this species truly be artificial?" "No artificial intelligence could replicate this level of emotional complexity," she replied. "What we're witnessing is the result of millions of years of evolution, not engineering." Evolution toward what? Toward loving something more than themselves. The human's vital signs were failing rapidly. Its grip on the commander's arm loosened as consciousness faded. But its eyes remained fixed on the pod containing its child. "Promise," it whispered one final time. Thralek looked at his wounded guards, at the sealed medical bay, at the tiny being whose soft sounds filled the sudden silence. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of command decisions that would reshape galactic policy. "The child will be protected." The human smiled and died with peace on its alien features. In the pod, Emma began to cry. Not the distressed sounds she'd made before, but something deeper. Something that spoke of loss and loneliness in ways that transcended species barriers. Vexhai approached the pod carefully, her scanner tracking the child's vital signs. The readings showed exactly what she'd expected. This tiny being understood that its protector was gone. "Commander," she said softly, "we need to contact the Galactic Council." "Why?" "Because everything we thought we knew about intelligence and evolution was wrong." She gestured toward the small human, who had stopped crying and was watching them with eyes that held far too much understanding. "This species doesn't just survive. They transcend survival." "Meaning?" "They love harder than the galaxy believes possible. They sacrifice more completely than any rational being should. And they protect their young with an intensity that makes them capable of impossible things." Thralek sheathed his ceremonial blade and approached the pod. Emma tracked his movement but showed no fear, only curiosity. "What do you recommend, Doctor?" "We study them. We learn from them. And we pray that when they recover from their losses, they remember that we kept our promise to a dying parent." "You think there are more of them?" "Commander, no species develops this level of devotion to offspring unless it needs to. Humans didn't evolve to love this deeply by accident." Vexhai paused, watching Emma attempt to communicate with soft sounds and tiny gestures. "They evolved to love like this because they were surrounded by things that tried to kill their children. And now? Now those things will learn what happens when you threaten something a human loves." Outside Kepler Station, the void held its secrets. But, somewhere in the darkness between stars, refugee ships carrying the survivors of Earth were learning that their homeworld was gone. And they were learning that sometimes, love was the most dangerous force in the universe. Because humans, as the galaxy was about to discover, loved their children more than they feared death. And they loved each other enough to cross any distance, fight any enemy, and sacrifice anything to ensure that love survived. Even when survival seemed impossible.